My teacher kept giving me bad grades for no reason. I found his mistakes in the documents and filed a formal complaint. My professor kept failing me for no reason, but I made him regret ever crossing me. From the very first semester, I knew something was off. Everyone said Professor Miller was strict, but fair. At least, that's what I heard before stepping into his class. For some reason, he had it out for me from day one. Every answer I gave was wrong, every paper was plagiarized, and every test seemed to have critical mistakes. Only he could see. I wasn't a lazy student. I studied hard, I double-checked my work, and even compared answers with classmates. Funny thing? They got good grades for the same answers I wrote down. Me? Always failing. Always humiliated. The worst part wasn't even the grades. It was how he made it personal. He'd smirk, call me incompetent in front of the class, and once even said, "Some people just aren't cut out for higher education." Everyone laughed. My face burned with shame. That's when I swore to myself, I wouldn't just prove him wrong. I'd make sure he paid. For weeks, I collected everything. Copies of my essays, screenshots of online submissions, photos of graded papers where he circled answers in red that were completely correct. I started noticing a pattern. If a student he liked made a small mistake, he let it slide. If I breathed wrong, it was a 0. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. Until one day, I overheard him in the hallway telling another professor, "I can't stand that kid. Always acting smarter than he is. I'll make sure he doesn't pass." That sentence? That sealed his fate. I didn't act immediately. Nuclear revenge takes patience. Instead, I built my case like a lawyer preparing for trial. I dug through the university's academic policy. Turns out, professors are legally required to grade fairly and keep proper records. And if a student suspects bias, there's a formal process to file a complaint. But complaints without proof usually get tossed aside. I needed undeniable evidence. So I got creative. I started recording audio on my phone every time I met with him during office hours. I'd ask polite, simple questions just to see how he'd respond. Sometimes, I'd even ask about topics that weren't mine, pretending to be confused. He'd laugh, call me an idiot, and then, get this, explain the wrong answer on purpose. I checked those explanations against textbooks and online sources. He wasn't just grading unfairly. He was intentionally misleading me. I saved every audio file, every insult, every deliberate mistake. The breaking point came after a major exam. I worked night and day for that test. I even joined study groups, stayed up till 3 a.m. drilling equations into my brain. When the results came back, I already knew what he'd do, but it still hit like a punch to the gut. F again. Meanwhile, my study partner, who literally copied parts of my answers, got a B+. I confronted Miller after class, calmly asking why I failed. He didn't even try to explain. He leaned back in his chair, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Because you'll never be good enough." That was it. The fire inside me turned into something sharp, cold, and unstoppable. No more waiting. No more second chances. It was time to strike. First, I organized all the evidence. Audio recordings, documents, graded assignments, screenshots of class group chats where other students admitted they copied my work and still got higher grades. Then I cross-referenced every error he found in my papers with university-approved answer keys and rubrics. The result was crystal clear. He wasn't just unfair. He was breaking the rules, violating the code of ethics, and abusing his position of power. I drafted a formal complaint, not just a quick note. Oh no, I wrote a 25-page report, each page with timestamps, attachments, and side-by-side comparisons. I made it impossible to ignore. I sent copies not just to the department head, but also to the dean, the academic integrity board, and even the accreditation committee that oversees the entire university. Nuclear? Absolutely. The best part? I didn't stop there. I discovered that Miller hadn't updated his grading system in years. By law, professors had to submit updated syllabi and grading rubrics at the start of every semester. Guess who hadn't filed those documents properly? That's right, him. I dug into the faculty database, and with a little help from a friend in admin, I confirmed he hadn't submitted the required paperwork for at least 5 years. That alone was grounds for disciplinary action. When my report hit their desks, It was like a bomb going off in the faculty office. Suddenly, everyone was talking. Other students started stepping forward, sharing stories of unfair treatment. Some had been too scared to say anything before. Now, with my report as a shield, they had proof they weren't alone. The board scheduled an emergency hearing. Miller had to sit there, stone-faced, while I presented everything in front of a panel of professors and administrators. I didn't just show the evidence. I played the recordings. His voice, dripping with arrogance. I'll make sure he doesn't pass. You could feel the tension in the room shift. His colleagues glanced at each other, disgusted. He was done, and he knew it. And that was just the beginning. So tell me, if you were in my shoes, would you have done the same? Or would you have stayed silent and let him win? When the hearing ended, I thought justice was served, but the real fallout was only beginning. The day of the academic hearing felt surreal. Imagine sitting in a conference room, a long wooden table separating you from the man who tormented you for months. Professor Miller sat stiffly in his suit, his arms crossed, his face frozen in that smug half-smile he always wore. But this time his eyes darted nervously. For once, he was the one being judged. I laid out my case piece by piece. Every audio recording, every mismarked paper, every inconsistency in grades compared to my classmates. At one point, I projected two nearly identical essays onto the screen, mine and another student's. Same thesis, same supporting evidence. His got a B+. Mine got an F. Gasps filled the room. When I played the audio of him saying, "I'll make sure he doesn't pass," the dean leaned forward, her jaw tightening. Miller tried to object, mumbling about out-of-context recordings, but no one was buying it. By the end of the hearing, the panel was silent for a long, heavy moment. Then the head of the integrity board cleared her throat and said, "Professor Miller, these allegations are substantiated with overwhelming evidence. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending further investigation." He went pale. For the first time since I'd known him, the arrogance drained out of his face. That moment, that was my first taste of true victory. But I wasn't done. Nuclear revenge doesn't stop with suspension. No, this was just the spark. What came next was the fire. Word spread quickly across campus. Students whispered in hallways. Some congratulated me quietly, others avoided me, afraid of being caught in the storm. But behind the scenes, something incredible was happening. Former students began emailing me their own horror stories. Some said Miller had failed them repeatedly until they changed majors. Others claimed he made inappropriate comments or lost their papers until they begged him for mercy. He had built a career on intimidation. My case gave them permission to speak up. Soon, the Integrity Board had a flood of new complaints. The university launched a full-scale investigation. And here's the kicker. I didn't even have to lift a finger anymore. The dominoes were falling on their own. Still, I wanted to make sure he couldn't wriggle his way out. So I dug deeper. Remember how I found out he hadn't updated his grading rubrics for years? Well, I checked his publication record too. Every professor is expected to publish research regularly. Guess how many papers Miller had produced in the last decade? 0. He had been writing on old credentials, collecting a paycheck while barely fulfilling his duties. That's academic fraud at its finest. I sent that information to the accreditation committee. Then, just to twist the knife, I sent copies of my report to a local journalist who covered education scandals. They didn't bite immediately, but I knew once the investigation hit the public record, they'd be all over it. Meanwhile, Miller tried to fight back. He emailed me directly once, calling me a vindictive little brat and threatening to sue me for defamation. I didn't even reply. Instead, I forwarded the email to the dean and the integrity board. That single message? It became Exhibit A in proving his harassment. Weeks later, I walked into class one morning to find a substitute professor at the podium. Miller's nameplate was gone. Students whispered, "Did you hear? He might lose his tenure." Some looked nervous, others relieved. Me? I sat in the front row with the calmest smile I'd worn in months. The university finally called me back for a follow-up meeting. This time, I wasn't presenting evidence. I was being congratulated. The board thanked me for my courage and told me Miller was officially terminated. His teaching license was being reviewed by the state. In other words, his career was over. But the most satisfying part came a few days later. Remember that journalist I contacted? They finally published the story. Headline: University professor fired after pattern of abuse. Student's complaint unveils years of misconduct. The article went viral locally. Alumni, current students, even parents flooded the comment section with their own stories. Miller's reputation was shredded in public view. I thought that would be the end of it. But then, something happened I didn't expect. A classmate approached me and said, "You didn't just stand up for yourself. You saved us all. If you hadn't spoken up, he'd still be here ruining lives." That hit me harder than anything else. My revenge wasn't just personal anymore. It was justice for dozens of others who suffered silently. I hadn't just destroyed him. I'd freed everyone else from his grip. Still, deep down, I felt like one last piece of the puzzle was missing. Yes, his career was gone. Yes, his reputation was in flames. But I wanted him to feel the same humiliation he once forced me to endure. Not just professional consequences, personal ones. So, I started planning the final phase of my revenge. I learned from a friend in admin that Miller had been applying for new teaching jobs at smaller colleges. He was desperate, but with a formal termination and a public scandal on his record, doors were closing fast. I wondered, what if I made sure every door slammed shut? I tracked down his applications. How? Public job boards, leaked info from staff, and some creative digging. For each one, I sent the hiring committee a packet, anonymously, of course, containing the same evidence I gave the university. No lies, no exaggerations, just the raw truth. Every time his resume landed somewhere new, my packet followed. Within a month, Miller had no prospects left. He went from a respected professor with tenure to a disgraced academic nobody would touch. And the best part? I never once had to fabricate anything. He destroyed himself. I just handed people the receipts. At night, I'd sometimes picture him sitting alone in his house, opening yet another rejection letter, realizing his career and reputation were beyond repair. The same hopelessness he once tried to drill into me. That was now his reality. But even then, I wasn't sure if I'd gone too far or not far enough. So let me ask you, if you were in my position, would you have stopped once he was fired? Or would you have gone further, making sure his entire life unraveled piece by piece? I thought ending his career was enough, but then I discovered just how much damage one man's arrogance had caused. After Miller's termination hit the local news, my life changed overnight. People I barely knew stopped me in the cafeteria to say thank you. Some whispered it like a confession, terrified that even mentioning his name would summon his ghost. Others were bold, patting me on the back as if I'd scored the winning goal in a championship game. For the first time in months, I walked across campus with my head high. No smirk from him waiting at the door. No pit in my stomach before every class. Just freedom. But then came the flood. My inbox overflowed with messages from students past and present. Some were heartbreaking. One girl admitted she had nearly dropped out of college because Miller repeatedly failed her despite her high GPA in other classes. Another said he'd mocked her accent in front of the class until she stopped speaking altogether. And then there were the darker stories, claims of him making jokes about female students' appearances, punishing those who rejected his advances, and sabotaging academic opportunities out of spite. It hit me hard. My revenge hadn't just exposed a bitter old professor. It had ripped open a wound the university had ignored for years. Miller wasn't just a bad teacher. He was a predator, cloaked in tenure and authority. And suddenly, my personal victory felt incomplete. That's when the calls started. A lawyer representing a group of former students reached out, asking if I'd be willing to share my evidence in a potential civil suit. I didn't hesitate. I forwarded everything. The recordings, the documents, even screenshots of his threatening email. I wasn't just helping myself anymore. I was arming an army. Meanwhile, Miller's life was unraveling faster than I could track. The journalist who broke the first story dug deeper, uncovering financial irregularities. Apparently, Miller had been double-dipping, collecting stipends for research he never conducted, pocketing money meant for departmental projects. The university tried to bury it, but once the documents leaked, they had no choice but to announce a full audit. And here's the kicker. Miller wasn't just losing his job. He was staring down potential charges for fraud. I should have felt satisfied, but I didn't. Not yet, because despite everything, I still remembered the look on his face the day he told me, "You'll never be good enough." That smug, deliberate cruelty. He hadn't just failed me. He had tried to break me. And I wanted him to feel the weight of what it meant to be broken. So I dug into his personal life. At first, I told myself it was out of curiosity. But deep down, I knew I wanted more leverage. I found his social media, private accounts under fake names, but easy enough to trace once I connected the dots. Pictures of him at expensive restaurants, vacations abroad, wine tastings. Funny thing, though, none of those matched the salary records published by the university. How could a man making a professor's wage afford luxury trips to Italy twice a year? The answer came when I stumbled across a Facebook post from his estranged son. A single line, dripping with bitterness. Funny how Dad always had money for himself, but never for us. I went deeper. Court records, divorce filings, tax liens. It turned out Miller had been hiding assets for years, funneling money into offshore accounts while claiming financial hardship in family court. His ex-wife had been left with debt, his kids with nothing, while he played the role of respected academic. That was my opening. With a few clicks, I compiled a dossier. Bank transfers, property records, even screenshots of his luxury vacations contrasted against his sworn statements of inability to pay child support. Then, anonymously, I sent it to his ex-wife's lawyer. I didn't expect a reply, but I got one. A short, sharp message. "Thank you. This will help us reopen the case." And just like that, my revenge expanded beyond the university walls. Miller wasn't just fighting to salvage his career. Now he was facing his own family in court, with his lies dragged into the light. Meanwhile, on campus, something unexpected happened. My professors, ones who once seemed distant and untouchable, started treating me differently. Respectfully, one even pulled me aside and said, "You've done something most people wouldn't have the courage to attempt. Don't let anyone diminish that." But courage had its cost. Not everyone admired me. Some faculty whispered that I'd gone too far, that I destroyed a man instead of simply holding him accountable. A few students even accused me of being vindictive. For a while, I wrestled with that. Had I crossed the line? Was I becoming the very thing I hated? Those doubts disappeared when I saw Miller again. Not in person, on TV. A local news station ran a segment on a lawsuit against him. There he was, walking briskly into a courthouse, reporters shouting questions. His once pristine suit looked wrinkled, his hair unkempt, his eyes bloodshot. The man who once looked down on me with contempt now looked small, powerless. The caption under his image read, "Former professor faces fraud allegations, civil lawsuits from students and family." That night, I sat in my dorm room staring at the screen. My phone buzzed with texts. "Did you see the news? Dude, you destroyed him." But all I could think was, this is what it feels like when justice tips the scales. Not quick, not clean, but absolute. Still, there was one thing left unresolved. During the hearing, Miller had stared at me with this cold, venomous glare. He didn't yell. He didn't protest. He just looked, as if silently promising that one day, he'd get his turn. And a small part of me wondered, was he planning a counterattack? So let me ask you, if you were me, would you keep pushing until nothing was left of him? Or would you finally step back, satisfied that the scales had balanced? I thought I had buried him for good, but then he tried to crawl back and drag me down with him. The news of Miller's downfall spread like wildfire. On campus, his name became a cautionary tale. Professors lowered their voices whenever they spoke about him, as if saying it too loudly might curse them. Students who once feared him now shared memes, turning his arrogance into a running joke. For weeks, I walked around with a strange mix of pride and relief. I'd done it. I had pulled off the kind of revenge people only dream about. But Miller wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. One evening, as I was leaving the library, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. You think you've won? The voice hissed. My blood ran cold. It was him. Miller, this isn't over. You've ruined my career, my family, my life, and I will make you pay for it. The call ended before I could respond. I stood there frozen, staring at my phone like it was cursed. For a moment, I considered brushing it off as desperation, empty threats from a broken man. But deep down, I knew him too well. Miller wasn't the type to slink away quietly. Sure enough, within a week, rumors began circulating. Some students whispered that Miller was telling people I fabricated evidence. Others claimed he was trying to sue me for defamation. I laughed at first. How could he fight when the truth was so heavily documented? But then a letter arrived in my campus mailbox. Cease and desist. You are hereby ordered to retract all false statements against Professor Miller, or legal action will be taken. It was signed by a lawyer. A real one. My hand shook as I read it. I'd expected Miller to lash out, but this was a new level. He was trying to use the very system he abused against me. For a moment, panic clawed at me. What if people believed him? What if I got expelled, or worse, bankrupted by a lawsuit? But then the fire inside me reignited. He wanted a war? Fine. I would give him one. I contacted the lawyer representing the group of former students and forwarded the letter. Within hours, I got a response. Don't worry. He doesn't have a case. If he files, we countersue. The reassurance helped, but I knew I couldn't just sit back. Nuclear revenge isn't about defense, it's about offense. So I doubled down. First, I reached out to the journalist again. I provided every new detail. The threatening phone call, the cease and desist letter, the smear campaign he was trying to launch. Within days, another article dropped. Disgraced professor attempts to intimidate student whistleblower amid ongoing investigations. The backlash was immediate. Whatever credibility Miller hoped to salvage went up in smoke. Even people who once pitted him now saw him for what he was, a desperate man clawing at shadows. But I wasn't satisfied. I wanted him to feel the same suffocating fear he tried to instill in me. So I tracked his movements online. His once polished LinkedIn page was now a wasteland of unanswered job applications. On obscure academic forums, I found posts under his name begging for work. Any work. The replies? Brutal. Aren't you the guy who got fired for harassing students? Enjoy unemployment, creep. Still, Miller kept pushing back. He filed a complaint against me with the university, accusing me of harassment and defamation. It was laughable, but it meant another hearing. Sitting in that room again, facing him across the table, felt like déjà vu. Only this time, the power dynamic had shifted completely. When it was my turn to speak, I pulled out my trump card, a recording of his threatening phone call. The panel listened in silence as his voice echoed. I will make you pay for it. You could practically hear the nails being hammered into his coffin. The panel dismissed his complaint immediately. Worse for him, they cited the phone call as ground for banning him permanently from campus. He wasn't just fired now. He was forbidden from even stepping foot on university property again. I thought that would finally break him. But Miller was like a wounded animal, cornered, furious, unpredictable. A week later, my car windshield was smashed. No witnesses, no fingerprints, just glass everywhere and a gut feeling I didn't need evidence to prove. It was him. Instead of fear, though, I felt something else, cold determination. He wanted to play dirty? Then I would drag every skeleton out of his closet until he had nowhere left to hide. I contacted his ex-wife again, this time sharing what I'd uncovered about his offshore accounts. She didn't just reopen her case. She filed new charges, accusing him of fraud and hiding assets. Then I went one step further. I anonymously tipped off the IRS. If Miller thought losing his job was rock bottom, he was wrong. Now, federal agents were sniffing around his finances. And still, part of me wondered, was I going too far? Was I turning revenge into obsession? Those doubts vanished when I got one last message from him. Not a call, not a letter. A handwritten note slipped under my dorm room door. Enjoy this while it lasts. Everyone will see the truth about you soon enough. I held that note in my hands, the shaky scrawl barely legible. For the first time, I realized something terrifying. He wasn't just fighting for his career anymore. He was fighting for survival. And a desperate man has nothing left to lose. So I made a decision. I wouldn't just destroy his career. I wouldn't just expose his crimes. I would dismantle every lie he ever told until his name itself became a curse. And if that meant pushing further into the darkness, so be it. So tell me, if someone tried to come back for you after you destroyed them, would you strike harder? Or would you walk away and hope they never rise again? I thought I'd seen him at his lowest, but the final collapse was worse than anything I could have imagined. After the note slipped under my dorm door, I barely slept. Every creak in the hallway made me tense. Every shadow outside my window felt like a threat. Miller was desperate, cornered, and dangerous. But instead of fear, I felt clarity. This wasn't about grades anymore. This wasn't even about me. This was about making sure a predator could never crawl out of the ruins I had pushed him into. The investigation into his finances escalated quickly. The IRS subpoenaed records, and word spread that Miller had been hiding nearly $100,000 in undeclared income overseas. His ex-wife's lawyer filed new motions, demanding he pay years of unpaid child support. And a group of students who had joined the civil suit against him, their case grew stronger with every passing week. It was like watching dominoes fall, one after another, each crash louder than the last. But Miller still tried to claw his way back. He started posting rants online under fake usernames, claiming he was the victim of a smear campaign orchestrated by a vindictive student. The problem for him? Every time he posted, someone would reply with links to the news articles, court documents, or my airtight report. His lies collapsed under the weight of his own history. The final blow came when the journalist who had followed the story from the beginning called me. "We're doing a follow-up piece," she said. "Would you be willing to go on record this time?" I hesitated. Going public meant attaching my name and face to the story. It meant everyone would know I was the one who had pulled the trigger on Miller's career. But then I thought about the students who'd suffered silently, too scared to speak. If I could stand in front of the camera, maybe they'd finally feel seen. So I agreed. The segment aired on the evening news. There I was, sitting across from the reporter, calmly explaining how Miller had sabotaged students for years, how I collected evidence, how I filed a complaint. They played clips of my recordings, showed side-by-side comparisons of graded papers, even highlighted the financial records uncovered during the audit. And then came the headline that sealed his fate. From professor to pariah, how one student exposed a legacy of abuse. The backlash was immediate and merciless. Parents demanded answers from the university. Alumni threatened to pull donations unless stricter oversight was implemented. And Miller? He became a household name, not as a respected academic, but as a symbol of corruption and cruelty. Days later, footage surfaced of him leaving a courthouse, reporters swarming. His suit hung loose on his frame, his eyes hollow. He shoved past microphones, muttering curses under his breath. One reporter shouted, "Professor Miller, do you have anything to say to your former students?" His reply? A guttural snarl. "They ruined me. But here's the truth. He ruined himself. I just lit the match." The lawsuits drained what little money he had left. His ex-wife won her case, securing payments that would bleed him dry for years. The IRS slapped him with massive fines, and the accreditation board revoked his teaching license permanently. He wasn't just unemployed, he was unemployable. And then came the whispers about his personal life. His son posted online, "For years, nobody believed me when I said my father was a monster. Thank you for finally exposing him." That post went viral. Miller's own family publicly disowned him. One night, months later, I sat alone in my dorm, scrolling through the news. Buried between politics and sports was a tiny headline. "Former professor declares bankruptcy amid legal battles." I clicked. The article described him selling his home, living off scraps, drowning in debt. He had nothing left. No job, no money, no reputation, no family. Just a name synonymous with failure. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just revenge. This was erasure. He had spent years trying to erase students' confidence, erase their futures. Now, it was his existence being scrubbed away piece by piece. But the strangest part? I didn't feel the rush I expected. No triumphant music played in my head. Just silence. A deep, heavy silence that settled over me like dust after an explosion. I had won. I had annihilated him. Yet victory didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like standing over ruins, knowing nothing would ever grow there again. The university offered me a scholarship for academic integrity and courage. Other professors began mentoring me, encouraging me to pursue leadership roles. Doors opened where, before, there had only been walls. In the ashes of Miller's destruction, I found opportunities one never thought possible. But sometimes, late at night, I still replay his voice in my head. You'll never be good enough. And I realize now, maybe that was the engine of my revenge. Not just proving him wrong, but burning down every trace of his power until there was nothing left but smoke. Was it justice? Absolutely. But was it mercy? Not even close. So now I'll leave you with this question. If someone tried to ruin your future, would you destroy just their career, or would you dismantle their entire life, the way I did?